Live. Okay.
Hey.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Can someone from the audience just write in the chat if sound is okay, you can hear us, we're live? Because the first day that I did these talks, we were talking for 7 minutes and we weren't even live. So just want to make sure that doesn't happen again. Okay, so I'm just going to start rolling. So yeah, for those of you that haven't tuned in for the past 2 days, we are hosting a series of talks for the Dutch Design Week. And this is talks run with United Matters, which is a collective that actually started the year I graduated from Material Future. So it's amazing that it's still running. And we have these incredible Material Futures graduates. They just graduated very recently. And yeah, they're exhibiting their projects digitally this year on Dutch Design Week. So you can go to Dutch Design Week and check them out. And today we'll be talking to Emily, Molly, Oriol, and Sophie. And we're going to be focusing on social change. So designs that kind of focus on social change. And I will be asking them a few questions, but I will also invite the public to ask a few questions as well. So yeah, I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves and the work that you do. And yeah, over to you.
Cool. Hi, I'm Emily. Do you want me to carry on?
Yes.
I'll introduce the project. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So I've spent the last year plus really delving into like the very complex and very contradictory kind of food system and looking at hunger and how it works, like not hunger as in the food system, and this kind of paradoxical industry that we live in. And my kind of very briefly, I was looking at how we could basically solve hunger, which is not an easy problem. And I think very naively at the beginning, I thought I could do anything about that. And then in the end, my project turned into a research-based project that had a lot to do with looking at actually how the system works and how the structural inequalities in the society we live in. I based my project in London, in Peckham, where I live. How these have basically led a system that everyone relies on to get food from the farm to the plate. How these inequalities have basically led to being incredibly unsustainable. So there was a lot of I did loads of research, lots of volunteering with some amazing organisations, and then spent a lot of time working with people, particularly people in my local community, and basically just talking to them and trying to work out what firstly are the root causes of hunger and food like insecurity, which is basically the definition of not being able to access or afford regular, sustainable, nutritious food as you need it for your family or for yourself. And so I spent a lot of time with the Peckham Food Bank, which is run by the Trussell Trust, which is this huge food bank organisation that run most of the food banks in the UK, and basically started looking at this problem and started realising just how complex it is. And so after lots of this kind of research and really kind of trying to understand what I was looking at, because I thought I knew about food because I love food and I love to eat, but I didn't know anything about how it actually works. I kind of started looking at what we can do about it and what design can do about it. And it's such a complicated problem. Is coming at it from a design solution necessarily the right way to go about it? And there's so many amazing kind of food sustainability design solutions that are out there that aren't necessarily kind of focused around the people that they should be. And so in answer, there is not a simple way to do this. And I did not solve world hunger, unfortunately. I'm so sorry, guys. But I did. So my whole project was about thinking about the local communities and what actually would help people. And so I made a series of community larders that I set up in lots of locations around my local area in Peckham that were anonymous and open and accessible and free for anyone to use. And they all still exist today, which is really nice, actually. And I made an open source guide to go with them so that anyone could help themselves and build their own community larder. And hopefully there'll be lots more, just because I think everyone can associate with food and everyone eats. And so instantly, if we kind of create this open source, free, accessible way of sharing food and reducing food waste, because a third of food that we produce in the world is wasted straight away. So this idea that if we could just share our food, we would be much better off as a society. And if we could unite as a community and help our hungry neighbours. That was basically my project.
Amazing.
Thank you. Great. Hello, I'm Molly. And similar, I think, to Emily, I started this year being like, I'm going to single-handedly redesign and restructure the National Health Service in England. And quickly realized that that's not a one-person job. That's really not like a 100-person job. It's a bigger issue. And spent the year really spending a lot of time entrenching myself in the healthcare system that I've participated in throughout my whole life. I have a chronic illness, cystic fibrosis, so I spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals, getting kind of firsthand experience as a patient, but then also being really fascinated and interested by these systems as a designer, because I think it's often an area that kind of goes overlooked in design. And then the pandemic happened, and in a lot of ways, my project became much more relevant as everyone was for the first time confronted by their own medical vulnerability and kind of thinking about what it means to be a sick person or a healthy person. And so in the end, I decided to focus on kind of my own medical routines in isolation, as I was basically living by myself due to having cystic fibrosis. I needed to shield myself. So I was living alone for like 4 months in my flat. Kind of medicine was the first thing I thought about every day, and spent a lot of time reimagining these medical routines, the way that I took my pills and the way that I cared for myself, and basically turned my pills, which in COVID, when you're thinking about your own medical vulnerability, can be a really terrible, depressing thing. I reimagined the system and way that you would take them and turned these pills kind of into these strange kind of medical objects out of sugar. So I turned my own pills into candy at the end of the day as kind of a way to subvert these systems and kind of to question if we rethought the whole way that the medical system looked and the way that it worked, if we could then kind of, if that made space to redesign our own medical experiences and have the experience of medicine in hospitals and taking pills to be something less than this like heavy, difficult, very undesigned thing. And so maybe I didn't fix the NHS, but we'll get there eventually.
Cool.
So I'm Oriol. My project is Unknown Unknowns. That is a post-factual documentary film about the post-truth era. And yeah, basically my project was a journey about how emerging technologies are affecting and transforming democracies. So my documentary tries to illustrate how some of these technologies are changing the context that we are living in, and also how can we use design fiction to illustrate alternative realities. So I decided to create the documentary also because the conditions of the lockdown. So it's completely created and like from the beginning during lockdown with the help of two friends, a musician and an actor, that it was the narrator, but it's basically everything created during lockdown. And I invite everyone to watch it in my website right now. Well, no, after the talk. and and this is my project.
Amazing.
Hello. I don't know how to follow all this. It's really good. So I'm Sophie Huckfield, and I would say I'm like a transdisciplinary practitioner. And the project that I worked on throughout the year it's called Break the Frame. So it was looking at specifically at work and labour practices, but also the stories that kind of dominate in society and what these narratives kind of mean, like what that means for people who work and live. And I think actually my project's a bit of a love letter to the welfare state and how it's slowly being eroded. So my project began with my dad's redundancy, which was in in September 2019. And then it kind of, when I started to make the work, it like COVID happened. And then sort of people that initially thought they were comfortable and like secure, fundamentally have gone on, like have realized the precarity of work, and what's happening with it, like with deindustrialization, has led to the erosion of a lot of workers' rights, and also like who we rely upon and who we give value in society. So a lot of what, how we work and how we identify as workers is what gives you value, and usually it's placed in the wrong areas. So essential services, it's really kind of brought to light like what work is and how it can transform how you relate to the world. So I was looking at that, and then another part of what I was doing was looking at storytelling and sort of deconstructing the dominant narratives that were given. And a lot of those dominant narratives are around kind of maintaining the status quo, which benefits a certain group certain groups in society, and often seeks to kind of like sort of dampen the sort of tangent narratives of other groups that are usually oppressed in society. So I think a lot of what I'm doing is trying to, rather than necessarily creating new stories, because I think those stories already exist, they're just not given the platform. It's really about challenging the stories that we're being told, like, and who gets to tell them. So I was working a lot with sort of, how a lot of during work, like historically, a lot of subcultures have emerged from working practices of specifically like marginalized groups. So I was looking a lot at like pop culture and also like puppetry and like which were political tools and historically and actually really accessible mediums. So I really wanted to create something that wouldn't necessarily be in a gallery space where the people that I want to watch it wouldn't go. So yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think the first question I would like to address is that clearly you've all chosen to tackle extremely complex topics and extremely complex systems through your work. So, from trying to dismantle and redesign the NHS to sort of trying to tackle world hunger to like, the effects that technology is having on so many different aspects of our lives. And I can imagine, and I can imagine because I was part of, your initial research, that this is extremely complicated and frustrating, and sometimes you feel very paralyzed. So I just wonder how, what were the challenges of trying to tackle these huge topics, and how do you feel that you were successful in doing so at the end of the day through your projects?
I'll go first if you like. I think instantly when I started researching deeper into what I was looking at, I realized how naive I was about the actual the root causes of what I was looking at. So I was looking at hunger and why people are hungry, but actually it turned into a project that was really about inequality in a much wider spectrum. And it made me really question the kind of structural inequalities that are built in all the systems that we live by, and how complicated and difficult and set in concrete they are, but also how much people don't really know about them. And so the minute you kind of open up the conversation, it means you can actually start thinking about how you could redesign them or change them or make people think differently about them. But a lot of the time they are the way that people have, it's a very difficult thing to change because they are so integrally part of our society. For me, I mean, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but talking to people that have, because I have never experienced hunger, and I think this is one thing that I should mention, like I'm coming at this from a very privileged angle that I've never been hungry. And I think talking to people that have experienced some sort of food insecurity completely changed my original opinion about what I thought the problem was. And it's not about the lack of food, because we have so much food everywhere. In the UK particularly, we have, we waste more food than we really like. We have more food than we know what to do with, and it just gets wasted. And so it's less to do with there being a lack of food and more to do with accessibility, which is much more to do with the kind of structural kind of ways that societies work. For me, taking that back to making it more of like a grassroots thing, and so it's less to do with organisations or companies or these kind of things, but more to do with the people working together with what they have works better. But I don't know what you guys think.
I think it's also about it's also about, like you say, that a lot of these systems, it's not that like, poverty doesn't have to exist. It's actually a designed problem, and one and I guess it's really like coming to grips with the fact that you're not going to solve this problem, but also like design can be a tool. It's not the answer, I don't think, but it can be a tool to sort of access, maybe, I guess it's just like fundamentally it's like knowing who your audience is. I guess if we're talking about a complex problem, it's knowing who you want this to reach. And that's, for me, was the biggest challenge, because I was like, okay, I'm taking these really complex ideas, I'm reading lots around them, but it's very easy to get lost in the sort of intellectualizing of it. And for me, it was really about like, okay, I'm going to use stop motion animation because that's something that you access when you're a child. So a lot of people understand the language around them already. So I think it's really like, it's not about being shying away from complexity, because that's really like, if when you start avoiding that, or you want to pick a simple, you want to deal with the symptom and not the cause, then nothing will change. So I think for me, it's really about, thinking like, as a designer, that you don't exist in a silo, and then it's also like it's a layering. And I think all our projects are about layering.
And
I completely agree.
Yeah.
You go.
Like, I don't know. I think when like you get started on these projects, like you kind of are like in the mindset of like, it's going to be me single-handedly taking the system down, and you're like very quickly humbled that that's not how it works at all. No one has ever like made like real positive change by themselves. You need to get so many more people involved. Like you need designers, you need policymakers, you need like in my case, you need doctors, and you just need to kind of talk to people about like the things that you're trying to do. Because I remember one of like the most like shocking things when I was in the beginning research stages of my project was I was speaking with like my like team of doctors and nurses, and they were just like, no one has ever asked me what I think the problems are within our own department, and that is like the like hospital room system where they work. But because they're there like to do a very specific job, which is to take care of people, which like is amazing and incredible. But they're not designers. And so I think it's really important that you have this kind of like cross-disciplinary collaboration in order, if you want to actually like achieve something.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, I wanted to say almost the same, like this ability to generate collaboration within a project. I think that it's super important, and I think that is in our discipline as a designers. I think that is maybe also like super important at the same time as other parts of a project, like I don't know, the conceptualization of the project and everything. So I think that this ability to generate links and this network that makes your project better, or at least I don't know, maybe just shaping the project at the same time as you. I think that is also really important. In my case, for example, I mean, I never did a documentary film, so there was also like a lot of technical challenges. So with this collaboration, I think that I could make the documentary that in another scenario I couldn't. So yeah, I think completely agree with the rest as well.
So I think, I mean, you've touched on this briefly, all of you. And one thing that I found really interesting is that you've come with very different projects and very different approaches. So I think, like, in for example, in your case, Oriol, and even in Sophie's, storytelling is such a huge part. It's almost like the project. You're sort of conveying this huge topic through a story or a narrative. I think in the case of Emily and Molly, it was much more hands-on, like the physical and tangible output is much more clear. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your roles within the project, how has that perception evolved? Because I think that's kind of what you're saying now, Oriol, that like you're almost becoming sort of this connector, and you've sort of removed yourself from like what is traditionally understood to be the role of the designer. So you're almost reinventing that through your projects. And I'd just like to know more like how you see yourselves now as a designer after going through this process.
Interesting. I think that the main thing is that I don't feel attached to a specific outcome. So I think that with this collaboration, then all this process, as a designers, we have to be able to find the best way to communicate all this research or all these projects. So I think that the main part of the project is this feeling that I have right now, that is, okay, if the documentary film is the best way to communicate everything that I want, I go for it, even though I don't know how to do it, because there's other people that can help you with that. And even if the project is not your project, I think that is even better if it's not yours, because you are involving other people in this kind of journey. So I think that this is my view right now, and it may partly change because of this project. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it was like, because I also had never made like a stop motion film before, and it was very much like, okay, this, I don't know what I'm doing, but also I'm going to get a team to help. Like, so I had a musician create the score for me, and then I just figured out how to make a stop the movement. But I think it was very much like, I think for me my role is that I like to subvert things, and I think that's sometimes quite a nice way of like challenging people's assumptions around how we understand the world. And a lot of it, like of storytelling, a big part of it for me is about deconstructing a story and what that means, or deconstruct. And like you as a designer, it's like you're your own methodology, and it's about just applying the right methods for the right project. And a lot of it's all like, I think, you know, someone said that you're always asking the same questions regardless of what medium you're doing it in. So it's really about like, I guess it's about like your vision and what you sort of see emerging.
Emily, you seem like you want to say something.
I think for me, I think my role in this was more as kind of to facilitate a conversation that I don't think was having, and then also building like the physical. So I made all these cupboards basically, and they were very low tech and they were very DIY because I'm not a carpenter, and a lot of them are built in lockdown using random scraps of materials. And I think it was more the fact that someone had made this space where people could share food, and that was the designated space for it, allowed people to do it. Because I think people do it quite a lot in rural places, like putting, you know, if you have a little garden and you grow a lot of green beans or something, you might put them on your front wall and let it, you know, share it around. And I think that is really almost kind of project allowed for, but it also facilitated this conversation that I don't think people are necessarily having. And so part of my research, I did these like, I call them soupy Sundays. It's the worst name, but they were great. We made a load of soup and gave it to people in exchange for kind of conversation, just to hear what people were talking about and to hear what people's own experiences of food and hunger. And sometimes that was stories, sometimes it was favorite recipes, and sometimes it was very, very eye-opening, you know, experiences of people not being able to access certain foods. And that became very, very relevant in COVID, obviously, because suddenly everyone experienced this, not necessarily being able to go to the shop whenever you want and get whatever you want. Which I think a lot of people in the UK are very lucky if that's just what they can do and that's how we shop. So I think my role in it was maybe less, I don't know, I don't feel precious about the things that exist now. And I'm really glad that they exist and are still going, even though I have nothing to do with them. So a couple of the cupboards that I've built just are still kind of, there's one in a community centre in Peckham and one in a community garden. And they're just like running themselves. I check them once a week, probably at the moment, just to make sure everything's okay, make sure there hasn't been any vandalism, because occasionally there is, and just to make sure, you know, I give them a bit of a clean, give them a wipe down. But they're always full, and they're always emptied, and they're always full, and they're always empty. So it changes quite a lot. So I think for me, it's much less to do with my role in this anymore, which is why I would rather have nothing to do with them. I'd rather that they just lived on their own, and I'd rather that more people made these kind of things. And so I think for me, the design role has literally just been to start it, just kind of kick something off and have the kind of, I don't know, I guess, I don't know, the confidence, it's not the confidence, but like the kind of unafraidness to just go for it and do it, and then see what happens and leave it out there and let people interact with it how they want to, because it's much more interesting to not control that and not have any kind of part in that. But yeah, so that's what I think ours is.
And you, Molly?
I guess mine's kind of the opposite, where in many ways it ends up being all about me. Which, like, I definitely, like, you guys all like heard me fight it for so long. But I think at the end of the day, like, I really do think that design, like, is storytelling. And you need to draw from authentic experiences that you have. And so I really took this project like as an opportunity to really like use like my firsthand experience to discuss like a wider topic, and to take like my narrative and use that as a starting point for me to explore these kind of areas that I was really interested in. And so I don't know, in many ways, like it's hard to be like, oh, I don't want it all to be about me. But I don't know, it also is like, in order to be authentic, like you do want to draw from something that like you know and that you understand. So it's kind of somewhere in the middle of, while I would also love to have like no ownership of this project and like be kind of far removed from it, I also had to kind of acknowledge and like accept with myself that like I have all of this like firsthand medical experience, and like I have kind of an authority to talk about these things that like other people may not have, but have definitely experienced. So it was kind of, I guess, like it felt relevant for this project in particular, for me to talk a lot about myself.
But I mean, I think it's amazing because like what I can see from the four of your projects is that you've all come at very different scales as well, like, and from just sort of the overarching system, like, you know, Oriol looking at like democracy, to like something so small and individual as like your own experiences in the case of Molly. I think it's really good that, you know, you have the ability to sort of tackle social issues at very different levels. I think this kind of leads me on to my next question, which is that, you know, kind of seeing the world that we live in today, which is like absolute chaos, you know, from the fact that, you know, we're on the verge of environmental collapse to the massive social disruptions that we're living through the pandemic, which is, you know, very much present in all of our lives. I just wonder what are your opinions about the question of whether or not design can actually be a tool for social change? You've touched on it a little bit, but maybe I want you to reflect a bit more on that and be critical as well of it, because I'm not going to give my opinion, but I know that you have different points of view and I'd love for you to share them.
Can I kick off?
Absolutely.
I think that design is not a silver bullet, and I think it's often put on a pedestal. And actually, that design has perpetuated a lot of the problems that we're currently in, and that most designers deal with the symptoms and not the cause. And I think I've said that already, but I think it's like it's about taking the long game a bit more and looking at activism, because most activists never actually see like the fruits of their labor. It's like they know full well that they'll probably never see the change that they want, but it's about working collaboratively. It's about like passing the baton to the next people to be like, you're going to carry on, because it's like, again, I think it comes down to storytelling, that we've been told the narrative that there'll be a happy ending, and that's not really how society or the world works. It's about like, it's just constant, like it's about the reiteration of like the same problems but in a new context often is what happens. And like I'm for one would like, you know, full like anarchy, like I want things to change, like that's something I really want, but I'm also like realistic in that like that's not going to happen by myself. And I think the time for like, you know, like studios with a person's name on them are like coming to an end for now, and it's more about people realizing actually like design isn't above ideology, and actually we need to collectively work across like in an interdisciplinary way, that not just in design to like, if we want things to happen, it has to be from a grassroots, from a policy led, like it has to be work in conjunction. And yeah, that's my piece.
I think I'd agree with a lot of what you just said, actually. I mean, I think with all these kind of things, there's loads of amazing kind of startups and companies that are doing very beautifully designed solutions to things. But I think they are looking, as you said, not at the actual root causes of stuff. And so there's some incredible, looking at food sustainable, for example, because I've just really gone to town on that this year, looking at all these amazing different kind of companies and organizations that are doing underground farms and looking at the most sustainable way to grow biodynamic organic foods in like a tiny, you know, disused space that use a fraction of water and stuff. It's great, but they are not realistic solutions for the everyday person. or the people that are actually struggling with the causes we're talking about. So looking at the people who are most affected by the inequalities of whatever you're talking about, if it's democracy, if it's, the healthcare system, the people who are actually able to afford these amazing new kind of designed solutions aren't necessarily the people that need them. And I think that's one of the big things that I really was struggling with, that there's these incredible ideas out there that they're kind of missing the point a bit because they're not actually helping the people that they need to be helping.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go so.
It really comes down to like who you're designing. It's not about designing for, it's about design.
Yeah. And I think sometimes like designers' egos get in the way of necessarily, we're all here talking about our own projects, so we've got an ego ourselves. But there is like this ego of designers that they want their name on things. And I think sometimes the bigger picture needs to kind of come first. And I think everyone's projects, particularly in this like little group, have really like looked at the bigger things. However you've done that, however kind of what route you've done that in, is looking at the bigger systems and how we can think about changing them. And I think, a design for me is a really great communication tool, and that's kind of the crux of it. Like design is such a broad term; it can be literally anything. Like we design when we, write to someone or talk to someone, or do you know what I mean? There's a way that you do it all, and I think the way that you communicate is, for me, that's what I see design as, and so I see myself as a communicator rather than a designer. And so if I can make something that's quite complicated more accessible and understandable for a wider audience, then I've succeeded. And to me, that is like my kind of measure of success in the design world or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that it's super interesting I agree that design is not the solution, but we can, I think I have the feeling that we can use the tools that we have as designers to, instead of creating stuff that we know that this is part of the problem of our society, I think that we have the ability to also create other stuff, like we can change behaviors, we can spread some thoughts about what is happening. So that is also what I try to do with my project, and I don't want to like use my ego, but it's like I think that if we design alternative realities, if we recreate other ways of managing society, we are spreading other ways of managing the present and our world. So obviously this is not a solution, and we have to understand that. But maybe it is a tool to help, or it is a tool for others, again, to collaborate with others, and these others maybe can do also something. So I think that, again, we are really, really close to activism in this kind of structure way of working, and yeah, completely agree.
I wholeheartedly agree with everything else, and I think one of the things that is important to kind of realize within ourselves is what we are not. We aren't policymakers, we aren't scientists, we don't run food banks, we're not labor executives, if that's a thing. But we are, and so we can't necessarily affect change in that way, but we are designers, and so that is a different role and a perspective where we can question things. We similar to what Uri said, of we can bring in these new perspectives and create these different scenarios, and then when collaborating with these people that are actually in these places of power that can adapt, enact tangible change, then that's, I think, when something really special can happen. But similar to kind of what I was saying before, we just absolutely cannot do it by ourselves. It doesn't work like that.
And on the topic of collaboration, because I feel you've all touched upon that word and that idea, not only now but within your projects. I've asked this in the previous talks, but I think in your case it becomes even more pressing to respond to how do you build meaningful relationships with the people you collaborate with? Because in your case, I feel that you are talking about individual lives. You are talking about real issues that affect real people. And like Emily said, coming from a privileged place where, you know, you've never experienced hunger, the obvious thing is that you need to understand the root of those issues. So I know your projects have probably placed you in very tricky positions sometimes, where you've sort of felt this enormous weight because you almost take on the responsibility yourself. So like, I guess that's a 2-question thing, but like, 1, how do you build those meaningful relationships, and 2, how do you manage that responsibility within your own projects?
Who wants to go first? I'll go first. I think I found the kind of building relationships thing was a kind of, sometimes it was just really easy. You meet some people and they're so excited and they want to talk and they're just great and they're just really interesting and they're chatty and, you know, it's smooth and you're just like, oh my God, this person is incredible. They're like, you know, yeah, it's a very, very natural thing. I think sometimes you have to bug people, which particularly when I found people who are doing very, very important, very stressful jobs, there's a fine line that you don't want to like hassle them. There's kind of trying to build a relationship with them is not just sending an email and hoping they'll be like, yeah, of course, great, because they've got so much going on and they've got so much onus and responsibility on what they're doing anyway. Like particularly with the food bank that I worked with, the manager of the food bank has such a big job because he's helping 200 people a day make sure they get enough food to eat. And so trying to balance that relationship, there has to be a real sensitivity in it. But at the same time, I think people are really excited and willing to maybe kind of see it from a slightly different perspective. So I'm not coming in talking about fundraising. I'm not coming in wanting to do necessarily interviews with people, because I learned that is not the way that you get people on board. It needs to be much more casual and much more kind of, you know, a conversational thing, more like this than necessarily being like, can I interview you and take down everything you've said and then work from that? And so I think then it's more to do with just kind of, I mean, a lot of time needs to go into it, building these kind of relationships. And also there needs to be a kind of mutual respect where you both agree that, you know, there's no sort of, you're not gaining anything more than they're getting by talking to you. You know, you're not going to, I don't know, use the information they give you in a like negative way in any way or anything like that. And it's more just like an open conversation that you're having to try and learn as much as you can. And you need to listen to them lots and you need to talk lots, but also make sure you hear what they're talking about and try and react kind of accordingly to that. There was another part of the question, I've completely forgotten it was, I'm sorry.
The responsibility, but I think you've covered it. I think you've touched on it.
I personally have to say that I don't really know how to collaborate. I think that it's completely difficult. And I mean, the thing that I've done with my experience is try to do it the best that I can and learn every time, like, I don't know, more stuff. Because I don't know, but I think that at the end I agree also with Emily, but I think that it's like an exchange. So I think that it's this relationship that is not only from one side to the other. So it has to be like I don't know, the interest part of it is that there's a common interest. Like maybe there are different interests, but it's this kind of relationship of trust, of respect, and of shared interest. And yeah, but I don't think that there's like a formula or something just to collaborate with someone. I think that it depends of every project and everything that you do. And I think also that when there's a collaboration, I think that is super important to understand that your project is not solid and it has to evolve at the same time as this collaboration. So, and sometimes I think that this is super complicated also because how we learn or how we understand design or art is more like this project and these narratives that we create have to evolve with this collaboration. And is when we impose these things is when the collaborations are not successful, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree and think it's really you have to in many ways kind of like remove yourself from it and know that you can't really like predict what the exact outcome is going to be because you're working with people and like they're not robots. They have like the outcomes that you're going to get might not be the ones that you had hoped, but they will always be more interesting and more authentic than if you were to just be kind of doing these projects by yourself. So I think you definitely need to allow space and like feel willing in yourself that your project will change, and it will. Once the more people you get in, like the more voices, it will ultimately, I think, enrich it. But the journey that it goes on might be a bit wigglier than kind of like the straight line that you had planned for yourself to do this. Like, oh, simple, I'll just do this, this, and this, and then it'll solve all the problems. And then you talk to a doctor, and they're like, "What are you talking about? You silly designer, you don't know what you're talking about." So it's like a constant kind of conversation and readjusting, which can also be very frustrating and like overwhelming at times, but ultimately makes your projects better.
I think it's like important as well to like when you are challenged, it's like accepting like that you'll come with your set of like presumptions, whether you like, as much as you try not to, that you'll always have those in your head. And it's been like accepting when they're challenged, and then like Oriol said, like adjusting it and being flexible. And it really is like, for me, like I collaborate a lot, and a lot of it's based on friendship. Like, not sometimes it's like a building of a friendship because you approach someone, or sometimes it's like a long-term friendship. Like through lockdown, I think we all relied on like our friendships to help support a project. Like my housemate has a studio, and he was like, "Oh, there's a site here that you can use to film," like, and that was really generous of like him to do that. And I guess it's like, it's also a lot of it's about like care and like being caring to each other in terms of like, because you are taking someone's time, and it's like, and whether you can pay them or not, and like it's also about like, you know, establishing the boundaries and not crossing them, and when they're crossed for you. So like, you know, a lot of like workshops, for example, it shouldn't be about you taking from people, it should be about like what will they also get in exchange. So I think it's really like, it's setting like a set of ethics when you collaborate with someone, because I think there's a lot of collaborations where ethics aren't considered. You take and then you kind of like drop them, and that's really unethical, because like if you're dealing with someone who's in a precarious situation, who's relying on you, and then you let them down, then for your own benefit, then why are you there and why are you doing it? So, yeah.
I think to caveat what Sophie just said, I found having a group of like a community of people that I'd promised something to is the best motivation you will ever get, because if you let them down, you let them down. Like, it's not just a kind of, as you said, this isn't a made up thing you're proposing. It's something that's real, and you promise something, and instantly then you have to deliver. And I found that one of the, particularly in lockdown, which was difficult for everyone, particularly in lockdown, that was kind of going really. And I think the ethical implications of a lot of projects are where they fall down sometimes.
Yeah, I think so, in design in particular.
Yeah.
And I think like if you do promise something and it doesn't work out, then you have to you have to like make sure that you own up to that and can deal with the responsibility of like like not failing, but like not meeting someone's expectations. So it's being realistic to what your project can actually do as well.
Do you feel that, because all that I think touching on the topic of ethics, I think it's super interesting that you're saying that, because I feel that there's not enough conversations within design about ethics, and it seems that, you know, we're living in such difficult times right now, and there seems to be some sort of, don't want to call it a trend, but there's definitely a direction that design is taking of sort of like talking about these topics. And what it seems that you're saying is that these collaborations sort of cement this need for you to become extremely responsible and ethical. I mean responsible, but like to really take ownership of that and to actually carry it through. Do you agree with me in that sense? Do you feel that like building those meaningful and real world connections is what will make the difference, and what will mark the difference between design that's completely superfluous and all they're doing is sort of like creating stories and branding for egotistical reasons, let's say, and design that will actually mark change and that actually is genuine and ethical?
I hope so. I feel like it's very easy to come up with really incredible ideas from a studio where you're surrounded by, enthusiastic, like-minded people, and you've got a workshop there, and you've got this and this. Like, for example, the Material Future Studio, where we spent a lot of this project, was the most inspirational place, but also slightly removed from reality. Which I don't think is a negative thing at all. But I think at some point you do need to kind of place your project in a sense, like in a real world, or in a proposed real world, or something like this. I think doing it all fictional isn't necessarily the right way to create like a substantial, proper, like actual change in anything.
I think like when does theory become practice? And that's like the hardest thing to do. And like it's something I struggle with. And it's like I think it's important that we are able to imagine alternatives, and then it's an ethical process, but then it's actually putting into practice, and a lot of it won't work, and it's like, okay, now back to the drawing board again. Let's keep going. But also I think I think it's good that design is taking more of a social turn, but I also think it's looking at why that is. And a lot of that's because of a welfare state that has been like redacted, and that to plug that gap, they're getting artists and designers to do social projects with vulnerable communities. And it's like, designers, we're not trained as social workers, and we don't necessarily have the skills or the expertise to support people. So I think it's also being aware of like the mechanisms of like, I think all design is social fundamentally, and when people say it isn't, they're usually people with power or like it doesn't affect them. So I think it's also being aware that like it will always be a process of collaboration, and it's also about thinking of like, if you're being commissioned to work with a group, to be very clear as to what your role is within that.
Yeah. I'm just going to interject here really quickly. I want to open the questions to the public because I'm definitely getting carried away right now, and I'm conscious of time. So please just shoot your questions over in the chat, and I will ask them to these guys. But Oriol, sorry, you were going to say something.
No, I'm going to start with the questions, if you don't mind, because I have a question. What do you think? I mean, do you think that we need an ethical committee as designers, or ethics is something that we as designers, individual designers, we have to apply and control and understand? Because there are other professions that they have their own ethical committees, and they review everything that is going on. So obviously it's a different scenario. And for example, there are some sciences that their profession is related to life and death, and it's different. But we also have ethics in our profession. So I want to introduce, like, do you need that, or do we need that, or not?
Can I start?
Yes.
I just want to start because this is actually something that I think about a lot, and I am in two minds. I think on one hand, I completely disagree with restrictions. Like, I think you learn through making mistakes. I think ethics is something so personal and so individual to everyone's practice. However, I do think that debates need to happen. I think that the idea of ethics needs to be raised during our careers, and I think like we need to be able to respond about our own ethics. Obviously it's very difficult because, like, in my case, I did a project about the virtual reality and rape, and my project was almost going to be shut down. And in my mind, that's wrong, because there's probably an ethics committee somewhere that decided that, my project shouldn't be exposed to an audience. But then on my hand, I think that actually, on my side, I think it's really important to have these projects, to have these conversations. So like, I'm a bit in two minds there. Yeah.
I think it depends on the execution as well, like of how you go about it, like where you raise those debates, like and I guess it comes down to free speech as well, like that you should be able to like put those projects and have those, like, we need to talk about rape, like,
yeah.
But I guess a lot of it comes down to like, I don't know, I guess for your project, Oriol, which was all kind of about the ethics of technology and like what's happened with these technologies and what it's led to in terms of that it's actually now put our democracy under threat. I guess like from your perspective, how do you think like your ethics would, like what would you as a designer think would be a good ethical kind of, not solution, but like approach?
No, but maybe, I don't know, like if some designers are kind of generate this debate, as Martha said, okay, maybe not restricting something, but I don't know, if they are able to point out some projects or some behaviors or some parts of the industry that is dangerous, maybe it's important that we have skilled designers that are able to understand the bigger picture and tell them, and that their opinion and their speech could be relevant. I think that is not a bad thing. I think that if it's restrictive, maybe it's a problem. But I think that it could be useful as well if there is a debate out of it.
And I just like jumping on that, Oriol, because like I feel in your case, I don't know if anyone's seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix. I watched it because I was ill last week and I was like, I just need to watch something. But one thing that I was really surprised is that why aren't there ethics committees in these companies? Like, you know, it's sort of kind of what your project is alluding to, that like maybe if someone had started to consider the implications of those technologies, like the ones that you're talking about, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Obviously,
I'm sure there are.
Do you think
I'm
so?
sure
Because actually what the documentary says is that, you know, people that have worked there are the only ones that have sort of flagged those ethical concerns. And then because of that, they started to consider that. But do you think so? Do you really think that?
I think that there are some people there just controlling, but I think that in this system, I think that it doesn't make any sense to have like someone slowing down a project, especially in around technology. So the market is super fast. They produce something, they throw it like into society, and then they check if it's working. If not, they adapt everything. So when there is someone there slowing down all this process, this means that they don't make money as expected. So this is a problem, and it's not like a specific problem or of an industry or a company. It's more like a systemic thing. So especially in technology, I think that, I mean, and also like in these kind of companies, if there are any ethical committee, I'm sure that it's not it's purely of engineers and of I don't know, of technological scientists, and there are no philosophers, there are no politicians, there are no social workers there to analyze and imagine possible consequences of these things, because there's no time for that, I think.
I also think, following on from that, you're never going to know every single person's response to something. Like, there is, you know, it's very difficult to predict things like this, and I think there should be a, you know, more ethical education or teaching in any sort of design schools, if we're talking about design schools, and in general, people just thinking, it's like it's empathy, really, isn't it? It's thinking about how someone else might react, but it's impossible to work out how everyone's going to be able to react. And I think, I mean, like you were saying, Yuri, until something's put out there, you're only going to then find out what all the problems that arise might actually be, because you can't predict every single person's experience with it. And I think it makes it very tricky. It makes it very, very difficult to kind of safeguard against these things. I think the best that we can do in design is just to kind of predict as much as we can and try something in, you know, instead of putting something straight out there for the use of everyone, maybe try it in smaller groups. That's why you get, like, you know, study groups, and you know, when you get like a group of people and they test something and they trial it and you talk to them about it and you hear what their experience is with it. And that's, I mean, you go more. Yours is, I think, big in medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think in many ways it's also just about like getting more voices in the room, because I think that's like one of the biggest flaws of design is just like one like white person just deciding that this is going to work for everybody, and like it's really important, because I know we've sat in the studio just talking about projects that we've seen and being like, how did this get approved? Like, how did this not pass through someone that flagged it? So I think it's really kind of important to like, because everyone on some level has some kind of bias, and so it's really important to just get more voices in and get more people in the room, and so that the more people that see it and the more perspectives that are kind of involved in our projects, the less likely it is that something slips through the cracks that is unethical and problematic. But yeah, I know. I think we've all. I mean, I guess us in particular, like, remember having like big, like, quite stressful chats about like.
But I mean, I think that's
So,
super important, though. I think that's like really that's just the thing that you do, and that it's really healthy that you do it, right? Like, if you don't consider what your project is gonna do once you put it out there, what are we doing here? Especially you guys that are, you're super committed to the work that you're doing, and like I think you've all taken on the projects really personally as well, and like you really believe in what you're doing. So I mean, I think it's the basics of what you've done in Material Futures, that you just need to talk about your work and like what it's going to do. So I have a question from the audience. I need more questions from the audience. Where do you see your role as a designer outside the academic world? That was from Maria, by the way.
Thank you, Maria.
I guess like I feel like Material Futures as a course has always been about like go outside the four walls of this building and like get like go to it. Don't like read about it. So I think it's like I think academia is like really important, but also it's like, with everybody's projects here, it's about like who it will affect. And I think it really is about like, okay, we're reading all these things, but actually like where is it happening? So I think a lot of how we all work is outside of academia anyway, but very much like it's like one foot in the door and then the other outside. So it's sort of like seeing what's happening from like the kind of academic sense, but also seeing like where you could put it in the world.
I think, as Sophie said, part of one of the very, very small maybe positive points about the lockdown was that suddenly we weren't able to be in the lovely safety of CSM, and it transformed everyone's projects in different ways. And I think, generally as a group, I think everyone just like their projects were so much better because of it, because there was an authenticity to them, because they weren't happening in the amazing workshops in CSM where you can cut things to the millimeter. If you're making something, it was kind of dodgily in your back garden or your room, like you, Soph, doing all a bit more DIY and, a bit more real in a way. And I think that, I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I feel like everyone's projects came up better because of it. So I think the kind of removing yourself from this very academic setting kind of helped us a bit work out, oh, okay, when we leave this place, this is what it's going to be like, potentially, unless we found an amazing studio we can work in. Yeah,
like, in many ways, like, I don't know, I think because we did spend a lot of time like in the studio in CSM, within kind of those four walls, but designing for the real world, or like hoping to design for the real world. So I do think like, while very difficult in like many ways, lockdown did push us to kind of reframe our projects and be like, okay, great, now that you don't have a studio, you're forced to actually like tackle these like problems head on, from your bedroom, part of the real world, which I do think also like made them much more authentic. But yeah, I guess as design, like, we just have to keep getting out there, which can like be like uncomfortable. But I don't know, there's something really valuable in being that kind of uncomfortable in those spaces.
Yeah. I think that it's getting out there, but at the same time, it's finding the right way to, or the ability to use the industry and the current market and the current system with your own purposes. So we all know that we want to tackle some complex topics and social stuff, but I want to use the existing industry. I cannot make anything without it, even though I criticize it. But I think that now outside the academia is a uncomfortable moment, as Molly said, like that, to find this way and to discover this ability. And yeah, I think that this is the main, I mean, at least for me, I think that this is the main challenge that I see, like, but I'm also excited. So it's like, yeah, both things at the same time.
There's definitely light at the end of the tunnel, guys. I've gone through the tunnel. I have another question. How emotionally challenging are these sort of projects? So basically, how emotionally challenging is it to work on these projects?
I'm going to say speaking for everyone, I imagine now, in the nice way possible. There's been a lot of tears in this room because of just trying to work out how you can, I don't know, even beginning to understand the, breadth of what you're looking at, even if you look at one very specific thing. So, looking at one situation of this in one area, in one time, at one place, all this kind of stuff. It's just so huge, and it's so much bigger than us.
I think it shows that you care. Sorry.
Yeah, please go on.
I think if you weren't emotionally invested, then why do it? So I think you have to be, and I feel like there's this idea that you need to be sort of detached in some ways, but actually it's because you care and that's why you're doing it. So emotions are really important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
completely agree.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in lockdown becoming very emotionally invested in everything about healthcare and the system, and quite literally people are dying, and I think it's really hard to kind of strike that balance between getting really overwhelmed with the whole system and becoming too emotionally invested, which I think then just kind of paralyzes you, and then you can't do anything, which is not helpful either. Or in between of being too far removed where you don't care and then also don't do anything because it doesn't really affect you. So I'm always on the team of more emotion, more feelings. But it's really kind of trying to strike that balance where you obviously still care, but you do at the end of the day you're doing a design project.
Yeah.
Trying your best. Yeah,
I agree. Especially because I think that we are focused on this thing and this project 24 hours every day during a certain period of time, and this is super overwhelming sometimes. So finding this balance to feel emotionally good and to take care of your mental health as well. And so I think, but personally with my project, I had so much fun. I tell everyone I had fun. It was a huge challenge. The situation was no good. I was so fortunate that with COVID everything was fine with me and with people, with the people around me. So I cannot complain at all. But because of that, I had fun doing this project. I don't know, it was a huge challenge, but at the same time it was a nice experience. And at a certain point I didn't care about the outcome. It was just enjoying what I was doing. And that's it. And then someday I had a documentary ready for everyone. So it was that's what I wanted.
Yeah, I think for me, I had to carve some little puppets, and then all my emotional investment went into them. So it was I had some friends. I was just made on my own with my puppet. It's a bit like Wilson in the film with Tom Hanks. what's it called? Castaway.
Castaway. Yeah.
Missing
the beard.
Yeah, just needs the beard. Okay, another one. You're all amazing. The silver lining of the pandemic is that is what you're all talking about: collaboration. Pharmas are working together. What are your thoughts moving forward about collaborating together?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Let's start tomorrow, guys.
Yeah, I think like actually COVID, like we were always quite like all of us like as a big group were always quite close. But I think COVID really made you realize how important collaboration is, and like how we all care and want things to change. And I think it's like a group of people that at some point in your life you're gonna work with.
Yeah,
it's just like a matter of
time. Okay, we're gonna do one more. If anyone has the last one, just throw it in there, but we'll do one more. Have any of you had to deal with any public backlash? If so, what impact do you think it had on the course of the project?
And I feel like you're the first one to go.
The very beginning of my project, this was just before lockdown, so it was like the first community ladder that I put in the kind of public realm. I had quite a lot of backlash from a very angry neighbour who then got the police involved, and then so the council got involved, and it was absolutely fine in the end, but it was a very stressful situation at the time, but in hindsight it just made me more determined to do it better. And it made me more determined to kind of try it, and worst comes to worst, I have to apologise to people, rather than waiting to go through the kind of paperwork and bureaucracy of, for example, the council that, it was the council that made it. They actually were fine about it, but trying to get everyone in the area's permission isn't going to happen, and you're going to be waiting for hours, for weeks and weeks to do that. Whereas if you just go for it and see what happens, and if you're on ground ready to change it, if people are really angry about it, but I think it just made me more determined, to be honest. And I think to kind of go, the opposite of that is that I've had so much more positive feedback from people who use it. And so I recently moved house, so I had to take down one of the larders, and I had like this stream of messages because I sent a message to everyone who'd used it, who'd kind of sent me basically when I built it, I put my number on it and they'd sent me messages saying they were using it. And I sent a message to all of them just saying I've had to move it because I'm moving house now. And there was just so much just positivity about, oh, this is amazing, thanks so much, we can't wait for the next one. And so it's just made me more determined to want to keep doing what I'm doing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, because I was working a lot with pharmaceutical companies kind of at the beginning of this project. And I had one meeting that I thought was going to be amazing and inspirational, but was actually the most soul crushing, depressing, just really terrible, hearing these big pharmaceutical companies that have billions and billions of dollars just saying the worst things that you never thought they would actually say out loud, and just was oh, what is the point? If the people in charge don't care, why am I even doing this? But actually the same as Emily said, I in many ways left that meeting fired up and angry, and this was okay, well if they're not going to do it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get all my friends involved, and so I think anger is in some ways a very good motivator. But
yeah, sometimes it's the fuel you need, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Passion. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap it up. I'm just gonna get you guys to give one word of advice to anyone that is thinking on taking extremely complex topics as their practice, as their graduation project. One word of advice.
Do it.
One word.
Do it.
One word.
Well, I mean, one sentence. Let's do one sentence.
I would say be patient.
Yeah.
It's not going to be fixed overnight. You're not going to understand it overnight. And the solution definitely is not an overnight thing. But if you work at it, you might maybe make one tiny part of it slightly better than when you started, which I think is in many ways a huge success. But yeah, be patient.
I was going to say, you want to shoot for the moon and then not be surprised when it doesn't happen like that at all. Go for the highest possible thing you'd love to be able to do, and then look at the tiny things you can make that might get there eventually, like the tiny little steps you can do. Get as many people on board as possible. More is more. Great.
Yeah. I mean, can I expand on my do it?
No, it was great.
I would say, like, don't be afraid to go a bit out there. And it is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's like, this is like your life's work. Like, this is not one project. It's like something that you're going to be chipping away at for a long time. And that sometimes actually the best design isn't in design, it's outside in the, like, the mundane. So, yeah.
And talk about it so much a lot, like every time, and share your ideas and your thoughts to anyone, and especially if they are not designers. So you have like different points of view and different opinions about it, and then with all these kind of thoughts, you can shape everything much better. I think personally that this kind of helps, but I think that everyone finds their own process, and this is beautiful in our profession because it's like everyone is kind of different, so it's cool.
Amazing. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up. Tomorrow we are going to be starting at 6, and we're gonna be talking about digital experiences with Florencia, Lizzie, Bridget, and I'm gonna forget the rest. Do you know who else this is?
Let me think it.
Sean. Sorry, Sean. I know you're watching. I completely forgot about you. Yes. I had a long day, so I completely forgot. But yeah, please tune in tomorrow for digital experiences. And thank you so much, guys. You're going to be able to watch, if you have missed the talk, you can watch it again because it's going to be posted on YouTube. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Marta.
You guys stay here. No worries.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm just going to stop the live stream.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.